Hi chickens, you're in my backyard again today, so you might hear some dogs or some children or other noises that aren't supposed to be on the video. I wanted to talk today about healing and about having a healing quality in your personality. This video is not only for those who do any kind of alternative healing or alternative therapy, like work with crystals or work with tarot or Reiki or anything like that, but also just for people who are at the moment finding themselves in a position where they're lending support to somebody, or who overall find that, you know, their friends and family tend to come to them for that kind of support. I wanted to talk about a few things that I've utilised in my own journey towards being a spiritual counsellor and a tarot reader. The first thing I want to stress is that you need to be prepared to just say it when you're giving healing, particularly if you're picking up messages from your own interpretations of the cards or crystals, or you're working with energy, you're working with spirit, all that kind of thing. You need to be prepared to talk honestly and openly about what comes up in that kind of setting. It can be all too easy to get into the habit of telling clients what they want to hear, or skirting around issues that come up in the cards that you are uncomfortable with going ahead and saying to them. Obviously you have to give the messages with tact and grace and diplomacy, and you should be giving those messages in order to want to instigate healing or empower that person to heal, but not saying things at all when they come up because you're kind of worried or nervous about what the reaction might be. Means that you're often missing opportunities to give out your gold, to give the wisdom that comes up from deep within when you turn a card over and you feel like it really ought to be interpreted to kind of urge a client to distance themselves in order to heal, or to consider certain aspects of their healing journey that might be difficult for them or might go against the grain of what they're doing currently. Obviously I feel there are no definitive answers that you should come forward with. It should always be to guide objectively and to get the client thinking outside the box and thinking in a new way. Obviously it's ultimately up to them how they take those messages, but I think that if you skirt around some of the more hard-hitting or difficult messages, then you're kind of missing a lot of what could come up that could be helpful for that client. And I also wanted to say that you need to be strong enough and fortified enough to know in your heart that you can stand strong and be firm in your core, whilst at the same time being enmeshed in other people's difficulties. Recently I shut my shop for a few days because I had an MRI scan last Wednesday and I'm getting the results this Friday, and I was finding that there were a lot of feelings of tension coming up and quite a lot of what I would call necessary self-involvement as I go through this time of finally being able to establish what's actually wrong with me and potentially get some more kind of invasive procedures done. I was finding that I was really needing to focus on my own mental health and on my own emotional well-being, so I shut the shop for a few days to clear my backlog and just to have a little bit of space to think about me and what I'm going through, because I have a clear understanding at this point on my journey with tarot that I need to be strong in my core and I need to be able to give of myself in abundance in order to make a reading worthwhile, both monetarily and energetically. So I would not be prepared to take someone's money and accept somebody's trust and go with them on that leg of their journey unless I felt centered and unless I felt focused, and at that time I didn't. So I gave myself that break, and I think it's really important for anyone who's involved in healing and involved in helping people to progress or evolve or shift, that they understand when they themselves are the ones needing to do that. And I think there's a lot of guilt that comes up for people in a position of healing where they feel like they can't step away, or they feel like, you know, they have the word healer kind of intrinsically linked to their personality, so they feel like if there's a point in their life where they can't provide that and they need to take some distance, they feel really bad about it, and I think that's a shame. And I think it means that healers kind of run themselves ragged and burn out when they don't really need to do that. You know, they can be honest with themselves. And the way I look at it, and I wrote a blog post recently called Lend Your Support Without Going Crazy, which I'll link below because it brings up some of the stuff that I'm talking about here. But the way I look at it is this: if you're really serious about helping people with their own journey, and you're really serious about guiding people and giving the benefit of the wisdom or experience that you have to give, or if you work with spirit and you feel like the messages that come up are strong and are healing and can do good for people, then you need to be equally serious about making sure that you're giving those that advice and those lessons and those words from spirit to yourself. Otherwise you're not going to be in the long term a force for healing, because you're going to burn yourself out. So I kind of see it as wanting to be the best healer that you possibly can be is completely intrinsically and undeniably linked up with making sure that you yourself are healed. So I think that's important. I've got a few notes here in case I miss anything. It's important to know what empathy is, and I think empathy is quite misunderstood. Empathy is not necessarily something that needs to come about through the premise of shared experience. You can empathise with somebody with whom you do not share their experience. Empathy is about communication and about having an excellent, potent imagination, so that you can put yourself into somebody else's shoes, whether or not you've actually shared that experience with them. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss about empathy. A lot of people misunderstand the word. And if you type something into Google, like what is empathy, for example, you'll get a lot of articles and things come up which kind of explain how the word empathy has been miscommunicated over time, and how people tend to think that its premise is only about shared experience, when in fact that's not the case. If you are entering into any kind of healing capacity or supporting somebody, empathy is important. And that's why I ask my clients to give me some notes about their situation and about where they feel they are right now. A snapshot, if you will, of what's important to them and what they want to explore, so that I can get into that empathetic state, so that I can kind of imagine myself into their shoes and understand what kind of help needs to become available to them. I think self-love is intrinsically necessary for a healer. I think that the last couple of days, I mentioned it yesterday actually, that I've been thinking of myself as like a classic Jungian wounded healer. I've realised that the stepping stone, the doorway if you like, which enabled me to come into a healing capacity for other people, had a lot to do with self-love. I struggled with that for a long time after I stopped self-harming, and when I was in recovery from self-harming and from the eating disorder that I experienced too. And when self-love started to become central, and when it started to become something that wasn't going anywhere, that was when I realised that healing, the desire to heal and to advise and to give my experiences to others and to help people to feel empowered and such, that's when it became a big deal for me, was when self-love kind of came along and it didn't really go away. So I think that if you are in a healing capacity in people's lives, or you tend to feel that people focus on that aspect of your character, then you really need to ask how you are in terms of self-love and where you are on that journey, because I think that's important too. One thing I wanted to mention was the difference between enabling and empowering. I think people get that wrong a lot of the time. I think that some of the things that we do to try and empower people in our lives who need support actually flips itself over into enabling them. And what I mean by that is, say for example, if you have a spouse or a partner who has problems with alcohol, for example, and often has to take like Monday and Tuesday off work because they're caning the booze, if you make excuses for them and you pander to them and you make them breakfast in bed, and you do things that you perceive as being caring, you're actually enabling their irresponsibility and you're enabling their bad habit. You're perpetuating their vicious cycle for them. So even though it feels loving and nurturing from your perspective, it's enabling. I think that a lot of subjects that come up for us when we're in a healing capacity have to do with understanding the difference between enabling and empowering, and making sure that we don't get those two words muddled up. A lot of the time in my past, I've been there in a healing capacity for a friend, and I've realised that what I'm doing is actually enabling, and it was completely unintentional, but it's kind of like my nurturing was allowing them to stay in the same place, and I had to kind of stop doing that and reverse what I was doing, or distance myself, because I found that I couldn't give healing in any other way. There was kind of a negative cycle perpetuating between me and that person, where I felt that I always had to be overtly nurturing, but I realised that actually it was toxic for them, so I had to step away, kind of thing. So I think you need to know the difference between enabling and empowering a friend or family member or client who comes to you, and that's something that can get quite sticky, but once you kind of find your way into that territory and you recognise the differences, then that can be very helpful for you when you're healing. I think it's important to know that you're going into a healing role for the right reasons. And I read an article about this in Psychology's magazine a while ago, and it actually really wound me up, because there was this really prominent psychotherapist writing this article about how so many people go into counselling for the wrong reasons. they go into counselling because, you know, they were wounded and hurt themselves, so they feel it's their duty to, you know, make sure that others are okay. Or they go into counselling because they want to feel a sense of power, or they want to feel a sense of superiority. And frankly, the article was overtly negative, and I found it kind of a bummer to read, because I thought, well, you know, most people go into wanting to heal and wanting to support people for totally the right reasons, and why focus overtly on the negative? But I do kind of see where she's coming from. You need to know that you are not wanting to get into a healing role to mask your own need to heal. I think that's one of the main reasons that maybe healers falter and fall down, is because they get into it to kind of mask the healing that they still need to do. And I had to be very straightforward with myself about that when I started actively getting involved with clients with tarot and stuff. I had to know that my journey, that leg of my journey, was done, and that I was comfortable that it was done. And I think I've done that, and I'm happy that I've done that, and that I know that, yes, I am strong in my core, and I am fortified enough to go through these same issues and a myriad of other issues with people without trying to use it to mask my own need. I'm not doing that, and I think that's something it's really important to focus on. Get to know the techniques that you use to prepare for healing work, and to prepare to do things like readings and stuff, or even just to prepare to spend time with a friend who's going through a very difficult situation. I tend to prepare for readings by meditating and clearing my mind. I also prepare by taking 1 or 2 days to actually look through the client notes and any client history that I might have had with that client, previous readings and such, to kind of get an understanding of what I want to do with the reading, and decide if I want to customise the cards, or if there's certain things that I would like to bring up and explore that I think would be helpful for the client. So I have a bit of time to think about what I'm going to do and how I'm going to formulate the card positions and such, so that we get the maximum opportunity for forward motion for that client, and the maximum opportunity for long-term benefit too. I also sometimes prepare by having a bath, a long relaxing bath. This will be just before I do a reading. I have 2 energetic shadow map readings coming up around the new moon, and they involve vision questing, and they are very long and complex and quite, I have to be intimately connected with spirit to do them, and they do take a lot of my energy to do them. They also require a vast deal of empathy, as well as the ability for me to tap into and access the darker parts of the psyche of another person. So for this, I feel like, as well as preparing through using practical things like taking a look at the lunar phase and deciding exactly when it would be the most potent time to do an energetic shadow map, I also feel like I like to have a bath, and I like to get really centered. I like to clear my mind of anything. Also, I've noticed that before I do something like an energetic shadow map or a fool's journey reading particularly, I tend to start cloud gazing and smoke scrying, and kind of like divining things from various things that I see, and a lot of the time it's not even intentional. I tend to go off into that. It's almost like I'm really opening up to accept kind of what I would say is an espresso shot of spirit, if you will. So that's kind of part of my preparation as well. I do that. I sometimes make some notes or a journal about the different things that I feel may come up during the reading, and how I want to deal with them, and so on. I have a few clients who are fairly regular with me now, and I'm very aware of their story and their journey, and we do sometimes email between readings, so that I can get an idea of where they've been going with their journey and what the snapshot is at the time that they purchase and stuff. So I feel like I can keep my hand in, and I can have an understanding of what's going on as they progress. And with those clients, I may make some brief notes in my client notebook, which is 100% top secret notebook. I keep it in a special place, and I kind of sometimes have case notes, if you like, and that helps me to prepare. It helps me to get settled on what I feel the focal point of the reading should be, in accordance with their needs and what they've communicated to me. The last thing I wanted to say about being in a healing or supporting capacity with anyone, with a friend, with a client, is to make sure that you don't do their emotions for them. And this is something that my mum used to say to me quite a lot when I was younger. It's really important that you don't enable somebody by actually processing their emotions for them. For example, if they've been betrayed by a partner or a friend or a work colleague, it's important for you to allow them a safe space where they feel secure to process the emotions they feel without actually taking on those emotions and saying, yes, this person betrayed and manipulated you and it's disgusting, and you know, you're a pure spirit and they're not, and just think about everything you're going to get and everything that karma is going to give to them. You know, karma's going to kick them in the arse. This might be what you feel a client wants to hear. I mean, to be honest, for most of you watching this video, I think I'm just teaching you to suck eggs, but I'm just putting it out there for the purposes of it being well-rounded, and this is something that I think it would be ridiculous not to state, this idea that you shouldn't do other people's emotions. It might be tempting to jump on that bandwagon and to, from an empathetic standpoint, experience those emotions with that person. But what you're doing there, you're doing two things. Firstly, you're enmeshing yourself to a degree that might be unhealthy for you. You still need to maintain that sense of distance for your own self-interest and for you to remain strong enough to actually help them process these things. The second thing that you're doing though is you risk giving them a place to have that comfort and have that security without going through those scary emotions themselves, like anger and fear and so on. They are often part of a process which is much more well-rounded and will come out at things like sorrow and acceptance, but they need to be done. It's so important that you don't do them for your friend, and a few times in the past I've done that. I've done that with friends who have been in long-standing difficult relationships with their partners, and their partners have really behaved badly, and instead of giving them that space into which they can kind of explore their anger, I've actually done their anger for them. And I think this is true for most people, that we've had a stage in our lives where we have felt so angry on behalf of our friend or family member or client that we've almost started venting our anger from our own place, and that enables them to kind of skip past their anger or feel that they're doing it without really doing it. So I think it's very important to note when that might be a potential danger for you, particularly if you're doing healing work with someone who is a very close friend, with whom you have a very vested interest, and perhaps you know the other person, or you know a lot about the situation, or you are enmeshed yourself in the situation. It's very, very important that you don't do that person's emotions for them, that you give them that space in which they feel like they can safely explore their emotions without actually taking them on board yourself. I think that for me, my journey with giving readings and stuff has been incredibly profound and beneficial. I think that I've come to learn over the last 2 years the ways and means that I need in order to be a fortified and strong and giving healer that wants to offer people abundance and wants to offer people a place to be inspired and be empowered and to heal completely and to shift completely. But in order to do that, I've had to get to know myself much more as well, and you know, there have been peaks and troughs in my own development as a qualified spiritual counsellor, where I felt like there were certain things I was learning about my own journey that could contribute to giving better and better and better support to people. So I kind of note these things down, and I'm conscious of them, I'm consciously aware of them all the time, and I think it's really important to recognise that if you are a healer in any capacity, you are going on a journey towards learning how to become better at doing that and how to become healthier. So these are just thoughts, and I hope they were useful to you. Much love.